Hey kiddos, welcome back to Drawing with Trowbro, and today we're going to be looking at how to make a rainbow fish. Rainbow Fish is a character from a book series called Rainbow Fish, and he is created by the illustrator and writer Mark Pfister. And we're going to be looking at how to use color and line to make pattern and repetition on the scales of our rainbow fish here. And it's okay if you are new to art. Art takes a lot of practice, all right? And so if you mess up, use your eraser, or you can always turn your paper over. But go easy, don't be hard on yourself, all right? If you're new to art, just remember that you're only just beginning, and this is not where you're gonna end up, all right? So we're gonna keep practicing, we're gonna keep drawing, but we're gonna draw together, and let's go ahead and get started. All right, so with my pencil, I'm gonna draw the rainbow fish's body, and it's just gonna be an oval on its side, kind of like an egg. And then for his head, I'm gonna draw like a little C shape, and then a little bitty circle for his eye. Now for his lips, it looks kind of like a capital letter B. It's just a little bump, and then another little bump for a little puckering out. And then I'm going to draw a pupil in his eyeball, which is another little circle. And then his fin is a little triangle on the top, a bottom fin, another little triangle. And then the back, it looks kind of like a C shape, or maybe a moon shape. It's called a crescent. And now I'm going to draw his scales, and they look kind of like C shapes too. And I put them one right after the other, and then I go to the top of each one and I kind of like jump. And I go all the way down to the top of the hill, and go to the next top of the hill, and the next top of the hill. This is called a pattern. And I'm going to repeat this pattern over and over again. Little hill, and it always jumps from the top of one hill to the top of the next hill. So anytime I'm drawing with my line, I'm going to the next top of the hill, to the next top of the hill, and it's important that I try to keep them all the same size. I don't want to make a big one and then a small one. I want them to be all about the same size. And then I think I have all of my rainbow fish ready. I'm going to erase any lines that I didn't want. Now because rainbow fish is underwater, I want to draw a couple air bubbles to show that little air is coming out of his mouth. And I'm just going to draw a couple little circles over here. And I'm not going to go crazy. I don't need to draw a million bubbles. I'm just going to draw a couple. All right? Because if you draw a lot, you're going to have to paint around them. And then some seaweed. And the seaweed looks kind of like wiggly hot dogs to me. Looks like a little wiggle, a small little wave. Don't make them too wiggly, because it's going to be harder to paint around it. Because remember, everything you draw, you have to paint. And so if you do a lot of million little details, it's going to take you a long time to paint them. Now, one thing that really helps me when I paint is I'm going to take a black crown and I'm going to trace over my rainbow fish. And what this is going to do is it's going to create little walls between each of the shapes. So when I go to paint my rainbow fish, the wax of your crowns are made out of wax. It's going to help separate the colors. So it's kind of like a little barrier that keeps colors separated and they won't mix, and it'll make your picture a lot better. So I'm going to go over all of my rainbow fish with a black crown. Alright, if you want to, you can pause the video right now, but I'm going to speed this up so you don't have to sit here and watch me trace over my whole rainbow fish. Now I'm using watercolor here, but if you wanted to use crowns or markers or colored pencils, that's fine. But I'm just using regular watercolor. If you have other kinds of paints too, like acrylic or oil, you can use that. And the way watercolor works is you add water to these little cakes, and then these little cakes of color, like this yellow right here, it turns the water into that color. So that I'm painting with the water. That's why it's called watercolor. Now, for his tail and his fins and his face, I want to pick a light color, because normally the water's blue. And so if all the water's going to be blue, I want to use a different color than blue. So I'm going to use yellow, because blue and yellow are really nice colors. If you wanted to, you could use orange or maybe red. I'd use definitely a warm color, like think like hot colors, like fire, like red, orange, yellow. I'd use that because since the water is going to be blue, it's going to be very cool feeling. And so I'm going to use a yellow, think like kind of like a goldfish. I think the actual rainbow fish uses a blue color, but I want to use yellow just to give it some contrast, opposites. And so I am going to my water, getting my brush wet, and then I'm painting. Now, a paintbrush is not like a pencil. You're not using pressure. You don't push down hard on your pencil to paint. It's kind of like a mop. You just kind of like drag it across. And if you start to paint and you realize there's kind of like a puddle, like too much paint, you need to kind of spread it out. All right, you don't need to get water every single time. I just get water when my paintbrush starts to, it's not like putting out any color. Like if it stops putting out any color and it's getting dry, that's when you get a little bit more water, dip it in the watercolor, and then you just keep on painting. Alright, and I got his lips right there, and then I'm going to paint some of his scales yellow. Not all of them, because remember he's a rainbow fish. I want to use all the colors. So I'm going to use my yellow and just paint a couple more of these little bitty scales, and then I'm going to switch colors. Alright, now I'm just going to kind of work my way down the rainbow. Right after yellow, I'm going to do some orange, and I'm going to paint just a few of these scales orange. And I'm going to be really careful. If you need to might let your fish dry a little bit, because if the paint is too wet and you're using a lot of it, it might touch and they might mix, and I'm really trying really hard not to let any of the colors touch. The black crown's going to help a little bit, but if your brush goes over a little too far, you might need to take a pause and let your paint dry. Now as I'm painting, I'm being very careful with my hand. I don't want to let my hand lay on any wet paint. So when I'm going to use this red paint and I'm painting all the scales, I'm being really careful not to let my hand touch the yellow, the orange, especially if it's still wet. If it's dry, it's okay, but if it's still wet, you got to be really careful, because if your hand gets in the paint, it can smudge it and it can knock some of that yellow into the other scales, and we don't want that. Accidents do happen, but just try to be really careful. Just going to go and paint a few of these. Make sure that you're leaving enough scales white so you can use the other colors like blue, green, and purple. And speaking of green, let's go ahead and start using green, and don't forget to do the seaweed. We're not just painting the fish, we're painting everything on this paper. And so since the seaweed's green, I'm going to be dipping my paintbrush in the water and painting these little wiggly hot dogs green, and then I'm going to go up and I'm going to finish my rainbow fish, paint a few of those scales green, and then I can move on to my next color. Alright, now my favorite color, purple. I'm going to paint a few of these scales purple. And you're kind of noticing that I'm using one color at a time. Alright, I'm not switching back and forth. I don't want to paint like a scale green and then clean my brush and then paint it red and then clean my brush and then use purple. I'm trying to use the color so I don't have to clean my brush as much. Nobody likes to clean for fun, so I'm going to make sure that I'm going to use the color as much as I can, and then when I'm done, then I'm going to switch colors. So I'm going to paint all of the scales purple that I want, leaving just the blue. And then when I do the blue, I can do the scales and the water, and I don't have to clean my brush. And that's why when I did the green, I did the seaweed and the scales at the same time. I'm making sure that I'm using my time wisely. Alright, now there's a lot of blue on this paper, so I'm going to be painting my blue scales, and then my rainbow fish will be done, and then I'm going to be painting the water around it. Now, it's really important that when you paint with the blue, alright, that you're using enough water. So sometimes when I go and I'll get paint and I'll dip it in the little oval and I'll put it on the paper, then I'll just use clean water and I'll add that water to my paper. Alright, I don't always have to take my paintbrush and stick it right in the paint every time. Sometimes there's enough paint on the paper that I can just use clean water and make the paint go a little further. Alright, so you'll notice that sometimes I just get water and not paint, because there's enough paint on the paper. Alright, there's enough blue water on the paper that I can just add clean water and paint a lot. So I'm going to speed this up so you don't have to sit here and watch me paint real slow. Now notice that I'm leaving the bubbles white because there's air in them. I don't want to paint them blue. Sometimes kids forget that. And I'm going to use a little bit of black, and his little pupil, that little circle inside his eye, I'm going to paint it black. So I'm going to swirl my brush in the black for a little bit of time. The longer you switch the brush, the darker the color is going to be. I want to be nice and pointy, and just the pupil. And now it looks like my rainbow fish is just swimming in the water. Some seaweed just kind of breezing with the current. And my rainbow fish is all finished. It looks pretty nice. What do you think? Well, kiddos, I hope you had fun drawing your rainbow fish. Make sure you keep practicing and stay tuned for my next Drawing with Trowbro video.